These measures include rights of conscience protections, not only for healthcare workers, but also for licensed professionals, defining and clarifying religious liberty rights for students in kindergarten all the way through college, expanding school choice opportunities, expanding parental rights protections. Governor Brewer was the first governor in the nation to sign a bill into law opting Arizona out of any Obamacare exchanges that will provide abortion coverage. Her pro-life record includes measures to protect the health and safety of women considering an abortion, measures to require that women have an in-person, informed consent consultation with a doctor and an ultrasound exam 24 hours before having an abortion. The Guttmacher Institute stated that Arizona has moved from one of the most supportive states for abortion rights to one of the most hostile states almost entirely because of Jan Brewer becoming governor. Most recently, Governor Brewer signed the measure to prohibit abortions in our state after 20 weeks. Last year, following many of these measures becoming law, Planned Parenthood announced that they no longer would provide abortions at 8 of their 13 clinics in the state of Arizona. The leadership of Governor Brewer indeed is saving lives in Arizona, both of preborn children and their mothers. In a recent interview, Governor Brewer said the following, and this is why I love her, quote, "I do not support the goals of Planned Parenthood because I believe in life. They believe in choice. So let's just cut right through the fat and tell it like it is," end quote. She's also stated publicly, quote, "Life does begin at conception, it's a baby," end quote. She openly acknowledges her dependence on prayer and God. She's a no-nonsense woman who speaks what's on her mind. She's a leader among governors in fighting the abuse of power by our federal government. Join me in welcoming a true champion of life and liberty, Governor Jan Brewer, a woman who tells it like it is, and as we say in Arizona, a governor who is doing the job the feds won't do.
Well, thank you very, very much for that very, very warm welcome. But more than that, let me say good morning to my fellow conservatives. Before I begin, I think it's appropriate to say a few words about the 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens, who brutally were murdered this week at the United States Embassy in Libya. These Americans were doing the difficult, often dangerous work of clearing a safe place for freedom and for liberty to take root. We owe them our thanks, as well as the solemn vow to bring the perpetrators to justice. Yes. Because an attack on our embassy and our representatives is no different than an attack on America herself. I am honored to be here with you at such a critical time in our nation's history. And I know those of you in this room are committed to restoring our nation's traditional values and putting our nation's capital back on liberty's path. I stand with you in this fight, and I stand with Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan in this critical presidential election. How great were they, by the way, in Tampa? Now, we all understand what's at stake on November 6th. America stands at a crossroads. This isn't the first time. In 1964, my hero, Ronald Reagan, put it this way, and I quote, "Our natural, unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment," end of quote. He could have been easily talking about today. This is such a big election, and yet the Democrats and their friends in the mainstream media want to make it about small things at a time when 23 million Americans are out of work. They want to question whether a candidate has been too successful. Now just ponder that for a moment. And all of this at a time when the real issue is why so many Americans go to bed hungry and awake the next morning without a job into which to invest their time and their talent. Well, you know, it's been said that a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job. And I believe a recovery for this nation will be when President Obama loses his job. In my book, Scorpions for Breakfast, I tell of my meeting with President Obama in the Oval Office when I told him that I didn't want to talk about so-called comprehensive immigration reform while our border was still out of control. But his administration was telling us and telling me from 3,000 miles away that our border was more secure than ever. Well, Mr. President, tell that to the survivors and the friends of Robert Krentz, a dedicated, community-minded man shot to death on the same southern Arizona ranch his family has called home for more than 100 years. Tell that to the friends and relatives of a brave and noble Border Patrol agent, Agent Brian Terry, a victim of a border gang that was armed by our own federal government, allowing guns to be shipped into Mexico in the scandalous Fast and Furious operation. And, by the way, our own United States Justice Department is shielding Attorney General Eric Holder from prosecution after the House voted to hold him in contempt of Congress. That's outrageous. The president and his party had both houses in Congress for 2 years and could have secured our borders and fulfilled his promise to fix our broken immigration system. But they failed. Frankly, failure is the hallmark of the Obama administration. They failed the American people regarding immigration policy. They failed to protect our citizens. They failed to preserve the rule of law, and they failed to secure our borders. Meanwhile, Arizona has been bearing the brunt of that failure. In response, we had no other choice but to act, and Arizona did so by following, not changing, federal law. Despite what you've heard from the administration, we're protecting civil rights, and racial profiling is not tolerated. Now, you may have also heard that just hours following the Supreme Court decision, the Obama administration revoked an agreement which allowed Arizona law enforcement officers to partner with the federal government in enforcement of immigration laws. Once again, they've denied our state the resources it needs, yet they prevent us from protecting ourselves. You know, I sometimes wonder whether, in fact, this struggle with the federal government will make us stronger, especially because now we fully understand what Barack Obama has done to our country. Today, we fully understand why we need Mitt Romney in the White House. On November 6th, Americans will make a choice about what's right and what's wrong. Wrong is President Obama accumulating more debt than any president in our history. Wrong is the fact that millions of Americans are unemployed. Wrong is supporting a change in the long-standing definition of marriage. Wrong is appointing federal judges who fail to protect life and the unborn. Wrong is our president apologizing for America when he travels abroad. Wrong is not supporting Israel 100% as our ally in the Middle East. And finally, wrong is his claiming greatness by blaming others for his failure. Well, here's what I believe, and what I believe is right. Right is calling a terrorist, yes, a terrorist. Right is calling a Christmas tree a Christmas tree. Right is not being afraid to salute the flag, wear a flag pin, say the Pledge of Allegiance, and sing the national anthem, unashamed with a tear in our eye. Right is not being afraid to say to those who are here illegally, you deserve no favoritism. Right is looking President Obama square in the eye, as I did, and saying, Mr. President, do your job, secure our border. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think what should bother us most is that we have a president who suggests that America is not an exceptional nation. What other country has sent its finest young men and women to fight on distant battlefields for justice and peace? What other nation ever rose to such strength, yet did not rise to conquer, but to protect? What other nation has acted not to dominate, but to liberate? We are an exceptional nation, all right. That's just a fact, written in blood and sacrifice of American patriots and their families. On the eve of the 1984 presidential election, President Reagan described the decision facing voters, and he said, and I quote, "The choices this year are not just between two different personalities or between two political parties. They are between two different visions of the future, two fundamentally different ways of governing. Their government of pessimism, fear, and limits, and ours of hope, confidence, and growth," end of quote. These words are as true today as when first spoken 28 years ago. The stakes of the decisions facing American people have never been bigger. President Obama doesn't have much in common with Ronald Reagan, but the principal difference between the two men is fairly simple. One wants to spread the wealth. The other lived to spread freedom. In Arizona, I have chosen the path of freedom. I decided to free the private sector from the burdens of overregulation and the heavy hand of government, because I understood that free enterprise, not bigger government, was the answer. Just 3 years ago, Arizona was literally on the brink. We were struggling with a multi-billion-dollar budget deficit, the worst in the nation. We needed a dramatic change in the philosophy of government. And Arizona is now living that philosophy. With a series of historic reforms, I lowered corporate income and property taxes. I lowered capital gain taxes, and I lowered business personal property taxes. I balanced the budget, eliminated 6 state agencies, and reduced personnel costs by 13%. I also thank you. I also reformed the state's Medicaid system, saving over $500 million per year. In short, Arizona created a model for economic recovery, very different from the Obama administration. Where they've spent, we've saved. Where they handcuffed private industry with excessive rules and excessive regulation, we unleashed the free market. Guess what? Our state budget is balanced with nearly $800 million in the bank. Unemployment is down. State programs are running more efficiently. And for the first time in years, Arizona has a state government it can afford. Thank you. These reforms have been accomplished through basic conservative free market principles of competition, choice, public-private partnership, and limited government regulation. You know, the kinds of things that Ronald Reagan was talking about, 50 years ago? And let me say right here and now, for the defenders of freedom and the free market, the United States Supreme Court decision upholding Obamacare was an overreaching and unaffordable assault on states' rights and individual liberty. Middle-class Americans are now faced with a massive new tax, the erosion of individual liberty and their health insurance choices dictated by an overbearing federal government. We need real, responsible health care reform. I believe true reform will spring from sovereign states, free to provide the coverage that best meets the needs of their citizens at the price that they can afford. That's why the Supreme Court decision makes the November election more important than ever. It's now up to the American people to save our country from this fiscal and regulatory nightmare. We need a president in the White House who understands the economy, represents free enterprise, and respects the Constitution and individual liberty. We must elect Mitt Romney and repeal Obamacare. Now, in his bid to win re-election, President Obama thinks Arizona is in play. He thinks he can win my states. Probably some of your states out there too. Well, you know what I say? Game on. I'm going to fight, and I'm going to travel all over this country, and I'm going to speak with every ounce of every piece of energy in me between now and November to return a Republican to the White House. Thank you, and all of you too. So, let's resolve to meet the challenges facing this great nation as conservatives. During the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter to a friend and said, and I quote, "I know there is a God and that he hates injustice. I see the storm coming, but if he has a place and a part for me, I believe I am ready." End of quote. Well, we know there is a God, and the storm is already here. And if he has a place and a part for me and all of you, I believe we are ready. Are you ready? Join me in this fight, and we will return the right leadership, conservative leadership, to the White House and Congress. Thank you all very much, and may God bless you and your families, and may God always bless and protect the United States of America. Thank you.